Done? Are we good?
Yep.
All right.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to Soas. My name is Shayan and I'm the Pakistan Society President here. And along with that I have Halima Hijazi, who is the President of Pakistan Discussion Forum, who has organized it all here for you all. At the very same time, let me introduce to Professor Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, who has been a prominent figure around with being an author of very famous books, including the Punjab Flooded, Partition and Cleansed, and the Pakistan, the Garrison Slave. Along with that, we have Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, another very prominent face that we all know in Pakistan and around the world. She's been a leading research analyst and as well as critically acclaimed for her deep dives in Pakistan's defense and security domains. And her groundbreaking book, Military Inc. and Inside Pakistan's Military Economy, has been very famous as well. So, over to you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Honestly, today, it's not every day that one gets Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, a trained political scientist, turned historian, to London to have a conversation. And thanks so much to the Pakistan Society, Pakistan Discussion Forum, which allowed this event to happen. Pakistan today, like always, like in every decade, is, feels like an interesting place. Our heart beats, we're like, what's happening there? Will it survive? Will it stay? Will it go? What's going to be its future? And I thought no one better to have this conversation with than Dr. Ishtiaq. He's written, of course, several books, but his most recent book is on Jinnah. And I think that is where one needs to start from. Because this is an ongoing debate. Today, the Pakistan that we see, is it Jinnah's Pakistan? And so let's talk about whether this is Jinnah's Pakistan or whether we could have had another Pakistan, a different Jinnah's Pakistan. So the program is that I'm going to have 40 minutes of conversation with Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, after which we'll open the floor for Q&A. Kindly, two things. One is make your questions short and precise. I know everybody knows a lot of things that they want to share, but it's very nice to give the speaker the opportunity to talk about issues. The other is kindly either put your phone on silent or switch off your phones. Much appreciated. So with no further comments, let me start this conversation. So, Dr. Sahab, is this Jinnah's Pakistan?
First of all, let me take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, the Pakistan Society, Pakistan Association, and all these very decent people who have turned up this evening. I'm greatly honored to be here at Soas. And a very short reply is, this is Jinnah's Pakistan. If you want me to elaborate, I could do it for the next 2 hours, but you better pose specific questions and then I'll respond. But my conclusion in the book also is, and I think there's a chapter which says, Jinnah's Pakistan. So about that I have absolutely no doubt that the type of politics Jinnah pursued and pursued relentlessly and created a hype about Islam being in danger of being annihilated, these are his words, Muslims being obliterated if Pakistan didn't come into being. That fear then came to haunt Pakistan when all the Hindus and Sikhs were gone, and the question was then, who is a Muslim for whom the state came into being? And since that day, the type of logic which was the basis of the two-nation theory has turned inside and has been victimizing linguistic nationalities, religious sects, subsects. So I say that once you use the logic of exclusion, ultimately one day you are all alone, and that's what Pakistan is today. And I would say that Jinnah and his arguments and his politics are at the base of what is happening in Pakistan.
See, but you've also pointed out at on several pages, you've pointed out that he then went out of his way to argue for protection of religious minorities, Sikhs, Hindus and others. And in fact, he insisted that, he asked the Sindh government to protect the Hindu population there. In some ways it reminds me, there are some commonalities. It reminds me of David Ben Gurion of Israel. There was a commonality. Both Gurion and Jinnah were liberal. And popularly we call them secular. I'm very careful in using the term secular about.
I would say they were liberal and communal. This is what was common to them. You can be liberal and still be communal, and that's what Ben Gurion and Jinnah were, and these are the consequences. I find that very similar, the outcomes. So liberal is no guarantee that you are not a communalist. I think this sort of hyphenated identity is very common in our part of the world. We bear multiple identities. One can be liberal in one sense, secular in another. You can have ham sandwiches and a drink every evening. And then your own daughter, who marries a non-Muslim, you completely disinherit her, never get in touch with her. For me, that is communalism, even in the family. So who's closer to you than your own blood? And Jinnah was willing to let go that as well. So I don't think he was liberal in the liberal sense at all. He used liberalism to a point, but basically his politics were divisive. And they demonized a group of people, originally non-Muslims. And then when Pakistan came into being, we know what has happened to our minorities and our national minorities, national ethnic, linguistic nationalities, and now Shia-Sunni conflict, the Ahmadis thrown out of the fold of Islam by the state, by a vote of the National Assembly. And then you have, if you don't mind, may I quote something to illustrate my point? In Punjabi, the late Allama Khadim Hussain Rizvi, the Labak gentleman, you can go and check it on the YouTube. He was speaking in Punjabi in Lahore somewhere, and somebody said, Maulvi Sahab, apna azan bhi hondi hai. Somebody is reciting the azan, and Khadim Hussain Rizvi says, Oriental dewe, surah di azan hai. And actually the azan was from the Ahl Hadith. So you go so far as to, exclude people who are within the Sunni fold even from the whatever you think is the right Islam and so on. So I think Jinnah may have used all this without meaning, but if you have gone through my book, I have come up with something which has not happened since the time of Plato.
Okay.
Everybody says that there is the power of the word. This we understand. But I have said, when you use a word, the creator is no longer the owner of the word if it becomes public consciousness. So maybe he was using all this to achieve what he thought was his rightful gain, and that was to have the partition of India to create Pakistan. But in doing so, he had already engineered a way of thinking, a mindset in which you demonize your opponent, either on the basis of religion or on sect, and so on and so forth. So I find this is Jinnah's Pakistan.
So, by extension, then does it mean that what is happening with religious minorities today, and exclusionary politics, which, by the way, is catching up in rest of South Asia as well.
It is.
Right, that trend. So that exclusionary politics is just, and the results we see today are just natural and started in 1947.
No, they started in 1937 when Jinnah told the governor of Bombay, Lord Brabourne, that henceforth I will use communalism, these are his words, to arouse Muslim opposition to a united India ruled by the Hindu Congress. These are his words. And I say that since that year, I want to see just one statement, message, written something of Jinnah, saying something else than that we need India to be partitioned because Hindus and Muslims are two hostile, antagonistic, inimical nations who, if they are forced to live together in India, would result in a civil war. And therefore, you have to divide India to create Pakistan. Fine. That objective was granted by the British because towards the end, they had come to the conclusion that a united India with Nehru as the Prime Minister of that India, it may not toe the line of the Western world and be either part of the Western world, or they would rather remain an independent sort of nation. And this is exactly what happened. The non-aligned movement came from India. And so in order to get a foothold in the subcontinent, you have to create a Muslim Pakistan, and I quote Lieutenant General Sir Francis Tucker, saying that there is much to be gained by creating an Islamic art emanating from Algeria into Arabia Deserta, through Persia into northern Hindustan, a Muslim state armed with Islamic ideology and British science as the bulwark to prevent the expansion of communism. So the British granted Jinnah Pakistan with that objective in mind. And that's what they achieved in 1960s, 78 when the Afghan Jihad sort of got out. It's Pakistan who played that role which had been assigned to it by the departing British. And Jinnah sort of gained Pakistan through that sort of imperialist collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, one of the patterns of was set very early, which is Pakistan turns into a rent-seeking state.
Then frontier state,
And,
exactly. Yeah.
and that, I mean, that question I'll keep towards the end, which is I'm going, let's talk about now, with geopolitics, there are no more rents coming to Pakistan, but we'll get to that later. Let me finish with this. He had in his cabinet, people like Joginder Nath Mandal, and he had Zafarullah Khan, and in fact, Majlis-e-Ihrar was in conversation with Jinnah, which he didn't entertain primarily because it was against Zafarullah Khan didn't accept
Right.
that,
Right.
right? And now, he did stand up to protect his friend and colleague, Zafarullah Khan,
I would grant that, yes,
right?
yes,
So,
yeah. If I may intervene.
yeah, sure.
I'm saying that this is the tragedy of Jinnah. He had created an idea, a mindset, which was beyond his control later on. If you first demonize Hindus and Sikhs and drive them out of Pakistan, the reasoning upon which we have based this whole notion is that if you don't have the right faith, then you are not part of me and you are by virtue of your religion or sect or whatever my enemy. And so Jinnah may not have wanted this all to happen, but I'm saying that the power of the word has to be understood in its own right as an independent variable. Once you create a consciousness where you make hatred of people the basis of your politics, it's bound to haunt you one day. Just look at what Mrs. Gandhi did with Bhindranwale, promoted him, to get at the Akalis, and then Bhindranwale, armed with that sort of thinking, turned against her. Look at the Americans who brought all the Arabs to our part of the world, and out of that psychology, mindset, whatever you want to call it, comes 9/11. And I think this is, so Jinnah could be acquitted if you want to believe that in his heart he didn't want all this. I'm saying that doesn't help. Once you have such a mindset and such an ideology, it's bound to haunt generations to come.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the same time in history,
Yeah.
you have two nations being formed,
Yeah.
and two nations on the basis of an exclusionary communal identity, Israel
Yes.
and Pakistan.
Yes.
Now, I'm just wondering, I mean, as a political scientist, if you go back and forth and look at the formulas that the leadership struggle with, and you in fact point out in your book that Jinnah didn't want a theocratic state. Now, his mistake was that he never pointed out that he wanted a secular state either. In fact, his formula was Britain, not Turkey.
Yes.
Despite that, by the way, the only book Jinnah had read was on Kemal Atatürk,
Right.
right?
Right.
So he was impressed, yet not impressed enough with Atatürk's
To make
formula.
a secular choice. Yeah. Right. That's what you're saying.
Right.
And I agree.
So, I mean, look at the formula. I mean, from a political science perspective, I'm asking you,
Yeah.
could it have been done differently?
Well, let's see when Jinnah becomes the Governor General of Pakistan. So let's say that Jinnah wanted to make amends for the type of demonization and so on type of politics once Pakistan had come into being. What does Jinnah do as the head of the state of Pakistan? First of all, in complete, flagrant actually violation of the rules of parliamentary democracy, he makes Mountbatten amend the 1935 Act to empower the Governor General with powers which even the Viceroy didn't have. I have given that all, you can read it in the book. And with those powers, he goes on to dismiss an elected government 1 week later in the Northwest Frontier Province, where you see you can under parliamentary system dismiss a government under Article 93, which is the power of the governor, if the party which is forming the government doesn't have a majority in the House, or there is a law and order situation where the breakdown of state order is possible. Neither of these two conditions existed, and he dismissed a government by acquiring powers which were not even available to the Viceroy under any of their previous acts. And who says this? The governor of Northwest Frontier, Sir George Cunningham, who had retired and gone back to England, and he was brought back by Jinnah with the help of Mountbatten. Mountbatten had to convince George Cunningham, and Cunningham writes, and I have quoted in the book, that I couldn't understand how Jinnah could dismiss an elected government, but we kept quiet because this was a new state which had come into being. What does he do next? Next, he declares that Karachi will be federal territory.
Right.
And Chief Minister
Ayub
Khodu, from the Muslim League, by the way, he says, sir, this has always been the capital of Sindh and it should remain with Sindh. And he dismisses him. And the Sindh government, I later realized, I have not written in the book, they were told to pick up and go somewhere else. They were not wanted in Karachi. How can you do it? You come to a province and you bring in all the refugees, and then you even drive out the people who historically have their roots there. Third, he goes to East Pakistan and tells them point blank that I tell you that Urdu will be the sole state language of Pakistan. Once again, I think that is complete disrespect to local, regional culture, identities whatsoever. Whereas we in the Punjab and so on could read and write Urdu and so on, the Bengalis were not conversant. So he, as soon as he did, the first agitations took place, and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was one of the agitators. So three decisions which Jinnah took, I think, lay the destruction of democracy. There is a book by Alan McGrath and by Khalid bin Said pointing out that these were completely against parliamentary democracy. And one thing more. While Governor General, he used to preside over the meetings of the cabinet. That again it can only happen occasionally if there is some, but he would do and make decisions on behalf of the Prime Minister, who would sit there and just sign the papers. So if we say that from where do we trace the destruction of democracy, I would say with Jinnah. So the
Garrison state starts there.
And I would say, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Already in 1946, he sends Isfahani to the Americans, saying that please do not oppose the establishment of Pakistan, because we would be your frontline state against communism, and as Muslims we will have links with the Middle East and serve your interest also there for the preservation of oil and so on. So I said Jinnah even is responsible for the military getting ascendance in Pakistan. So
but one question, you see in your book you point out that when 1947-48, the first war with India, and they, Pakistani military officers, in fact, one of the mistakes that is made then is that without permission of Gracie, and Gracie keeps screaming about it, that
yes.
you cannot destroy discipline, you can't use my officers and to have a war. Now, my question is, and you point out in your book that despite that Gracie didn't do what Jinnah wanted him to, Gracie didn't get punished.
He was promoted to Commander-in-Chief in February 1948.
So what was the fear? I mean, are you suggesting that Jinnah was powerful, yet not powerful enough?
I think that's exactly a conclusion which you draw very justly, because I have argued that Pakistan in 1955, if you remember, the case which was presented in the Supreme Court was that Pakistan is not an independent state. That is why the Governor General, who represents the British Crown, is entitled to dismiss the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, because they are no longer representative, Justice Munir. So it comes out of that. Insofar as military matters are concerned, the Supreme Commander of India was still Sir Claude Auchinleck. He was. And he overruled British officers on Pakistan side fighting with British officers on the Indian side, and he said no. And Gracie followed the instructions of him, because in that hierarchy, we were still not a sovereign state. Pakistan became sovereign, inverted commas, on the 23rd of March 1956. Up until then, we were only a British dominion.
So 1956, which is 1956. So had we had a constitution earlier, we would have been independent. And
had we had,
able,
we would be
able to fight our wars. I mean, this is a question which came up once. So
I have actually said, now I don't know how many people have read my book. One thing more about Jinnah which I want to put on record is that on the 1st of November, Mountbatten came to Lahore as Governor General of India, and he proposed that we can have a plebiscite in Junagadh, Hyderabad and Kashmir. And it is Mr. Jinnah who overruled this offer. Then in December 1947, Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan and Chaudhry Mohammad Ali, his close sort of, bureaucrat, they were in Delhi to discuss the partition process. It was still going on, and Mohammad Ali writes in Emergence of Pakistan, I think on page 237, could be here or there a little, but it's in the book, that at one point when we were discussing Junagadh and Kashmir and so on, the Home Minister of India, Sardar Patel, said, why do you keep talking about Junagadh? Let us settle Hyderabad and Kashmir. You keep Kashmir and we keep Hyderabad. And then I have quoted K.H. Khurshid, one of the presidents of Azad Kashmir. He's written a book where he talked to Chaudhry Mohammad Ali again to elaborate this point. And he said it's on the 22nd of December, exactly, that I went to Mr. Jinnah and told them that this is the offer from India. And Mr. Jinnah did not seem to be interested. Jinnah, the clever tactician, it seems was playing for some higher stakes regarding the princely states, but obviously he did not succeed. So Jinnah may have, on the one hand, because he was all powerful, included Jogendranath Mandal and Zafrullah, but at the same time some of his decisions came to haunt Pakistan. One reason we couldn't get Kashmir, possibly, is that it was an offer and we didn't take it. So Jinnah has to be understood in all these dimensions. What we have done thus far, madam, you know and I know, that what we have done in Pakistan is writing hagiographies of Jinnah. There is nothing which Jinnah has done can be wrong or flawed. I have said he was a human being. His achievement is that despite all the opposition, he did get Pakistan. But he made all these terrible mistakes as well. So that's what I've done in my book. And that is why even in Pakistan I was there for 9 weeks, and I was expecting a lot of even physical harm, and nothing happened. So I think the book has been able to convince people who really matter. And I'm sure, madam, you agree with me.
But, I would say he was a first generation of a populist leader.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
People eventually, and since then we've had 2 more. Bhutto and then Imran Khan.
Absolutely.
And all have, proven to be as flawed as the first one.
Yeah.
Sadly. But, in terms of relationship with the military. Now, if you look at Aqil Shah's argument in his book, Army and Democracy, his argument is that, and again, he finds the whole decision of not actually pushing Gracie and not punishing Gracie, not disciplining him as problematic, despite that we come across several speeches of Jinnah in which, he talks about discipline and a military kind of adhering to civilian control. But in your book on Jinnah, is a very interesting quote, and I'd read it out, in which he speaks to the armed forces, and he says, "You have to stand guard over the development and maintenance of Islamic democracy, Islamic society, justice, equality of manhood in your own native soil."
Yes.
So, you know, it almost gives an impression that he was giving them a larger role, was he?
He was. I have said he had already proposed to the Americans, we will be a frontline state, and you can't be a frontline state if you have an elected government. You need a strong armed forces to do the duty which the West would give you in case of a war with Russia. So Jinnah, I think, did have such a tendency. Even on the question of Kashmir, he was more hawkish than Liaquat Ali Khan. And one reason Liaquat Ali Khan, I think, was assassinated was because he realized they could not win the war and he was willing to go for the ceasefire. And Jinnah was the hawk. He wanted the Pakistan army to go and fight, and ultimately they did in February 1948. And Clowney's book, I have quoted, where he says that by the end of April, the Indians were pushing the Pakistanis back, you know, and then sort of they dug in, and that became the line of ceasefire. Later on, the line of control. So, Jinnah's domineering personality has been able to get Pakistan under very difficult circumstances. Whether this was the right thing or wrong thing, we can always discuss. But this achievement of his cannot be denied. But its consequences have been like the ones I've noted in my book.
Let me move to your other book, which is the Garrison State,
Ji.
which is again lots of hard work and a lot of details there. And the question then is that, and you have documented every single leader from Jinnah onwards, right? Till Musharraf,
Ji.
in fact, talking about every regime, every government. So what could have, and the framework of Garrison State that you've used, what could have done, what could have happened to pull it away from that, personality?
Well, I would say like this, that once Pakistan got itself opted into the Western alliances, we didn't just get military aid, we also got financial economic aid, and the World Bank was financing us to establish consumer industry. And I'm much older than you. I remember that we felt very proud that you could buy your own toothpaste and toothbrushes made in Pakistan, and this was happening in the early 60s. Once again, the decision is a military one. First, the Kashmir war they started, and then they started the 65 war, and where Bhutto Sahib was involved, instrumental. So the distinction between the military and the politicians, which people make conveniently, I find that that's not even fair. The two seem to have reinforced each other into doing these strange things. You are doing so well economically. The rate of growth of Pakistan was 5.3%. Gustav Papanek, who was the World Bank expert, he came to Pakistan and wrote a book saying that Pakistan is the model for all Asian countries to emulate. And Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Taiwan, people came to Pakistan to study what Pakistan was doing. They went back and remained faithful to that formula and became Asian tigers. We went into our jihad the second time into Kashmir, and I remember 17 days war, on the 18th, Shakil Ahmed speaking in his famous loud voice in Urdu, saying that the war has cost us so much that the prices of all essential goods will go up. I have argued, I'm not an economist, that until then there was a possibility that Pakistan, through the capitalist framework of development, could have generated an industrial base. But having gone to war, the World Bank stopped financing us, the Americans put an embargo on our weapons, and so already on the third day of the war we now learn we were looking for spare parts, and we sent all our senior officers to China, Indonesia, Turkey, Iran begging for spare parts. So this war had been started without any proper preparation. I mean, let me say something which might sound heretical. I think Muslims are incapable of strategic thinking. They are, yes, they are very good at tactical moves. Look at Kargil. What a tactical move, fantastic. Haji, how do you back it up on the diplomatic front? How do you go to your own people? When I wrote this Garrison State book, I went to India and interviewed officers there, and one of them, originally from Phula in Gujarat family, you know, he said that in the initial days, some of your soldiers got killed, but since it was not a declared war, we didn't know what to do with them. But then we have in the Indian army some Muslim units, so we brought the Maulvis from there, and according to the Islamic rites, they were buried. And then I think 3 weeks later, Pakistan began to acknowledge that they were, you know, not just Mujahideen, but Pakistan, whatever. And then they were returned, the bodies were returned. So you start with this Kargil thing and you surprise the whole world, and then you don't know how to consolidate that gain. So I'm saying this is something which even Jinnah could not have helped. This seems to happen all the time. Look at Hamas, what they have done. It's the same now, and each person dying in that area hurts us a lot. But I would say that, was there any planning how to sustain it over time? I don't think so. So I think Muslims have a problem in dealing with the modern world, with modernity, with planning things and thinking politically. We are still fixated into Islamic ideology. We look at the world through the prism of Islam.
Well, I would, you know, this would be a totally different debate if we got into that. Okay. So I would not get into that.
I was taking liberties.
There were, of course, sure you can. I mean, there are many instances where one could challenge this last thing that you said. I mean, I would probably argue that both the militaries of India and Pakistan around 1965 were essentially, and up until very recent, you know, they were Second World War veteran militaries that have had poor generalship. I mean, despite that, India's had decisive advantage over Pakistan, has not been able to really challenge Pakistan to that extent, and every 20 years Pakistan has managed to surprise.
Well, you are forgetting 1971, they got Bangladesh or helped them get independence. That's what the Indians have done, and that must be granted to them. So there is one case of great success, I would say.
But that's political. I mean, had a civil war not been there,
that's right.
In 1971 to take advantage of.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, going back to the garrison state. Wait, why is it? I mean, yeah, you've explained the formula that, and I agree with you that actually in Pakistan there is no pure, simple civil-military divide. I mean, I've used this argument in my book Military Inc. as well.
Actually, I was going to say much of this I've learned from you, and I acknowledge it in my book.
Very nice.
Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa's contribution has been of immense help to me. This is mentioned not only in my Garrison State book, but also in the Jinnah.
In fact, let me take liberty to give this, narrate this incident. So when I was writing this Military Inc., I was in Washington doing theoretical work, and one And one of the questions which bothered me was that, you could understand the military part of it. There is greed, they want to expand their perks and privileges. But for the life of me, I couldn't understand why civilian after civilian kind of continues to play by the military's rule. Benazir Bhutto has to sign NRO, Imran Khan is waiting for the right general, Nawaz Sharif does the same thing, they all end up negotiating. So what? And I remember one of the incidents that happened then. There was this new Murray project that was then envisioned, and one was like an IUCN, for example, warned the government that no, it's a bad project. And so the answer which I didn't get was that why is their thinking so short term? Why are politicians doing the same as the generals want them to?
Because they are tactical thinkers.
Until one day, I remember I went to the National History Museum in Washington, and I was walking through the section on dinosaurs, and I remember I was sad, and I was like, oh my God, this is my answer. It's very predatory thinking.
Very predatory.
So,
very well put.
Right, so it's predatory thinking, and the problem with predation is that there is no room for ideologies.
Nice.
Or long-term loyalties, nothing. So, but the question is then, how do politicians and the political system extract itself? Let's think forward. I mean, we know what the problem is. How does Pakistan and Pakistani politics extract itself from the garrison state? From the garrison state.
Yeah. Well, I think for a long time now I've been arguing that we have to get rid of this idea that we are the center of the world and we are a beleaguered nation where Noor, Yahud and Nasara are all involved in a grand conspiracy to break up Pakistan. What does Pakistan have to offer? Do we have oil? Do we have some precious metal for which the world is dying? Nothing of the sort. The only thing we can export are our soldiers, and those are needed in the Arab world and so on. So that's the only market we have. During the Cold War, we were a useful sort of ally, if you want to call, or just agents, clients of the Americans, and we used to say that Pakistan is the most allied ally of the Western world. Now we, for example, say that our friendship with China is higher than the mountains and deeper than the ocean. So if poets start making the foreign policy of Pakistan, you are not going to get very far. You have to do, people like you and should be brought into positions of responsibility. I have said, although I believe in democracy, but Pakistan needs to weed out so much of wrong things which are built into it that you need a representative government, not representative, but a government representing the national interest of all Pakistanis. For 6 months there should be open debate in Lahore, Hyderabad, Okada, wherever. Let people come and tell us what do they want Pakistan to be like. And out of it, then you can find some consensus. But if you just keep telling people that the whole world wants to finish off Pakistan and we need a strong army and all, you end up giving all your scarce resources to this institution called the Pakistan Army or military, and they do business.
Are you suggesting a caretaker government?
I personally wouldn't mind that. Yes.
No,
if you were there, for example, in the caretaker government, and your expertise were brought in, no, honestly, I seriously mean Pakistan doesn't have a class of politicians, you and I agree, who can show us the way. The latest is Imran Khan, and what happened to him we know. There is a prime, Nawaz Sharif has been brought back according to law. He is guilty of so many things. He is going to be acquitted now. So in Pakistan there is no rule of the law, there is no proper procedure. So I don't look at the army and the politicians for a way out. I would rather that for 6 months we let open discussion take place and a caretaker government of learned people with impeccable character who can come in and remove the blasphemy law. Islam can do very well without the blasphemy law. Why not? Politicians are never going to do it. The army benefits from it. So if somebody wants to really create a new Pakistan, it has to be people who are learned, who are responsible, and whose public life is without blemish. There should be Bhati.
Dr. Ishtiaq, one thing. Now, here I would really like to contradict you and challenge you. See, firstly, 75, 76 years of existence, you have a lot of what I call intellectual corruption. You know, we talk about financial corruption, all this financial corruption. Nobody ever talks about intellectual corruption. And let me remind you that 1980s is when, under Gohar Ayub and the entire team, the whole business of narrative was institutionalizing narrative started, right? You know, from Naseem Hijazi to Ishtiaq Ahmed to many others, a certain formula, a certain kind of thinking. And while, by the way, several books have been written on military and politics, on economy, and many others, I think this is a time when somebody should actually write about how militaries, how narratives are used to control national discourse and people. So I have an issue with, I mean, how will the modern generation of thinkers produce a new Pakistan? The other is that, you know, why would a bunch of people, you know, who are made to sit there in charge of charting the way for Pakistan be and suddenly given control, be kind of more dependable than what we have seen in 76 years. And one final, just two final points. One is that, see, unless cost of oppression or cost of a certain kind of politics is not, you know, it doesn't increase for either the politicians or the military, I don't think nobody is going to leave space. So my argument here is that actually there is no space for Pakistan to change under any caretaker government. And finally, I mean, what we are seeing is a state suffering from an autoimmune disorder.
Well, I think we are very close to the sort of conclusion which is frightening, that this state is in an advanced stage of disintegration as an idea. Physically, it may persist for a long time because, after all, there are 230 million people living in this state and it's a nuclear power. Pakistan disintegrating would mean an outflow of refugees in all directions. And Europe doesn't want any more Muslim seeking refuge. You know, you already see the reaction which is taking place. In a place like Stockholm, Sweden, you have people burning the Quran, and when I went there 50 years ago, we were so exotic, people would take us home to know about our culture. They were such a kind, decent, warm-hearted people. In these 50 years, we have done all those things which are unfit for the modern, pluralist, inclusive world. Attacking women, attacking even young boys, Afghans have been doing this, you know. All these stories keep coming in the Swedish press. And Sweden is not the only country, everywhere this is happening. So, our politicians, I don't find anyone who could inspire me, although I'm not against elections. If through elections we can get a clean and good government, very good. My idea was that before we have this government, caretaker government, for 6 months, the Pakistani state should let people come and speak their mind, like they let me speak my mind. I went to all parts of Pakistan. Islamabad, Lahore, Sargodha, Hyderabad, Sindh, Karachi, universities, think tanks. So the same ruling elite that we have realized that we need some people to start a new sort of argument, questioning what has been instilled among the people through the educational syllabus and so on, which is all hatred and all false and all distortion. So if they let me, they should let all Pakistanis for 6 months openly discuss that if we want Pakistan, what sort of Pakistan should this be? And then I think if you have a Shia and a Sunni and an Ahmadi and a Hindu and sitting next to each other, I don't think it's possible to say that I want a Pakistan in which I want to kill all these people. You can't. So let people meet one another and understand their common humanity and find a framework which will work. The Islamic ideology thing will not work. Jihad is only for defense if Pakistan is attacked. And I've said I'll bring my 2 sons back to Pakistan if somebody attacks Pakistan. Honestly, I mean it. Nobody has a right under international law to go and attack an independent sovereign country. But at the same time, us sending Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed into India and killing people there, and that also must be rooted out. So we need a complete overhaul of Pakistan. If we don't do that, then Pakistan is gone.
You remind me, I'm just about to open, for Q&A. It just reminds me of what South Africa did. So after the end of apartheid, and I think there was a fantastic formula that they used. I think we need to use it. A lot of countries need to use it. Besides the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they also set up security commissions. And they identified, for example, people who were stakeholders in security. So they had defense industry, they had the armed forces, the bureaucracy, but also the general public. So there were these commissions. Any ordinary person could actually walk into the commission and give their statement, what was their fear, what was their threat, what did they want protection against. And at the end of the day, they concluded from that, they reset the size of the armed forces, they defined a new mission statement. But I'm also I'm also conscious that in many countries, definitely in South Asia, the right wing is so strong that people will, give particular reactions to this question.
That risk is there.
But
what choice do we have?
So let me now stop here and start with, please be brief, introduce yourself.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Saab. We met 2 days ago at Garrison, the Congress. So Pakistan's facing an existential threat, economic being one of them. I'm an economist myself. I'm doing my master's at LSE. My question is to do with ethnic conflicts. So the province I belong to, Sindh, I'm from Hyderabad, I saw episodes of violence. Initially it was Pathan Muhajir, then Sindhi Muhajir. Having seen what you've seen and knowing what you know, do you see the Pakistani establishment coming to terms with its ethnic and linguistic diversity? And then second, quick one, what advice would you give me as a young Pakistani, a Sindhi, who wants a prosperous, modern and integrated Pakistan?
Thank you for this question.
Should we take another couple of questions?
I'm now 76, so if you ask, I'll forget the question.
Okay,
one at a time. And I think this is a very pointed question. The first is, I think I have a book, if you should read it, State, Nation and Ethnicity in Contemporary South Asia. It covers the separatist movements or the ethnic conflict in Sindh, Muhajirs versus the Sindhis, Then in India it was Kashmir and Khalistan versus the Indian government. In Bangladesh it was the Chakma hill tribes versus the Bengalis of the plains. And then in Sri Lanka it was the Sinhalese versus the Tamils, where I argued that the modern state is armed enough to crush rebellion, secession within its own territory. It is not capable normally of conquering countries, which was the rule previously. And that's what has happened in our part of the world. And I think a horrible example is the Tamil tigers, the way they were smashed. So the only time if Balochistan and Sindh can become independent, unlike Bangladesh where there was India which intervened, would be that the Americans or the Russians or some great power is out there to break up Pakistan. On their own, they don't stand a chance of seceding. Given that tragedy, that they are locked up in a state, we can all work together towards a democratization of Pakistan in which Islam should be the private faith, which I think is dear to the people of Pakistan. But so there are others who are not Muslims, give them dignity and respect and so on. So I would not turn this hatred now against the Punjabis, which is what I bear all the time. जी के पंजाब ने ये कर दिया वो कर दिया, which is actually true. But I don't think, except that you can make these accusations which are well founded, but there is no solution out of it. So we have to work hard towards a sort of democratic, pluralist, genuinely federal Pakistan. The 18th Amendment should become substantive. So that's one thing which can be done. I think I've answered your question. Huh?
Okay, the second question was, what advice do you give him?
What advice do I give you? I advise you to make the Sindhis learn to do research. You know, when I was writing this book on Jinnah, I wanted to cover the events in Sindh during the partition. And there is only one book written by a Sindhi young lady who lives in Bombay, a Sindhi Hindu. All these Muslim Sindhis who keep talking about Jai, Sindh this and Sindh that, none of them has written a proper researched book on Sindh. So the Sindhis seriously lack responsible scholarship. So I think you, through your economic training, can advise the Sindhis what to do in these circumstances to gain more than what they are getting at the moment.
And you know, a kind of integration is also happening, but not the right kind of integration. For example, it's the first time in history that there are 3 major generals who are Sindhis.
There are, that's a good news. Good news.
Well, yes.
Sir, my question, two questions I have. First of all,
Can you identify yourself?
yeah.
Identify yourself.
Okay. So, my name is Prasenjit Bhattacharjee, so I keenly follow geopolitics, fan of ma'am and her work as well, and I follow your work and your books as well. So, one thing actually I wanted to ask that, you know, in case of academic world, you actually, in your work, you have collected a lot of anecdotal history or the oral history because a lot of documentation was not available during the time of partition. Like right
you
now.
mean about the Punjab partition?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Similar thing currently is going on in India's Manipur state, where Kukis and Meiteis are fighting, and we don't know what is happening. We are hearing something from the media, some WhatsApp. So, when you don't have any FIRs or any collective evidence, but a lot of people actually, giving you their account, will that be considered as authentic, or can any argument be built on that?
Well, this is a matter of making a choice. Prior to my Punjab book, people based in the UK especially were writing about the partition of Punjab. But their research ended on the 14th of August when the governors of Punjab fortnightly reports came to an end. Because it was a taboo to move out of the archival material and go and talk to people. Before I started doing it, and I did it on a grand scale, Indian feminists, Urvashi Batalia, Ritu Memanan and Kamla Bhasin, they did a small pilot study of Hindu women who were traumatized by the partition and their lives and so on. So I said, I'm going to do it for the whole of Punjab. So the interviews I have collected, I have argued that the researcher, by watching the person, the body language and all, can very often make out if this is a genuine story or this fellow is making up. A few times when politicians were involved, I could make out that they were now giving me a script which was politically, but a common Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, doctor, so on, telling them about an event which took place, you have to put faith in the people as well. What they could do sometimes, that these people were illiterate, so they would say, "Asi hazara log mare." Maybe there were only hundreds, but that's not a lie. That is because they don't have any idea of how to count. So I have noted that all in my remarks why I have chosen this. And 95% of those interviews are now available for hearing at LUM's Partition Archives. And so that's, otherwise what is the choice? Archival material is missing, so should you not find out what happened after? Because according to Governor Sir Evan Jenkins, 5,200 people had been killed in Punjab by 4th of August. And he said, by the time I hand over power, maybe another 5,000. But at the end of 1947, 8 lakh Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs had been slaughtered. Now, is there any way of telling their story except to find people who remember what happened, who may even admit that they took part in these attacks and so on. So I think this taboo is also a convenient thing. You live in England and you don't want to go and talk to people. First, you don't know Punjabi or Bengali, so you can't do it. So what you do is you build a prejudice against those who go and do that and say, well, this is, how come we can trust this? But police reports are notoriously misleading, All FIRs, I have a friend of mine who got asylum in England, had an FIR written there that his life was being threatened, so he had to run away, and nothing of the sort had happened. So, I mean, why are FIRs more reliable than what people tell you of their own story? So this is just a prejudice. Yeah.
My second question.
Wait.
No.
Wait. Please, somebody wanted to ask. Sure.
Thank you, Dr. My name is Asad. I study public policy. So I would want both of you to maybe answer this because Pakistani state's response over the year has been with respect to India, staging these wars. So can you comment into like how the Indian drifting into a populism and then the Pakistani right wing as well. So how do you say, how do you see the future of South Asia, South Asian regional security when both of these countries have nuclear and sort of they're also, because India has been, we've heard from many scholars that India has been, over the years was a secular state, but now with Modi, so how do you respond?
No, this is a very bleak situation, a very dismal situation. Previously, we used to have this contrast about two states born on the same day. One went on to become an elected democracy and multi-party system, very strong election commission, everything was all right. Now that sort of thing is under attack by the right wing. So these are very demoralizing times for us who are concerned about South Asia. But then what choice do we have? Do we give in to this or we keep on questioning and presenting alternatives? And I have said that in my opinion, one way to close this is to have the courage on both sides to accept the line of control as the international border between India and Pakistan, but then make it open for all Kashmiris to freely move on both sides. And if that experience is a positive one, then we can do the same in Punjab. And like the European Union, we can also be a number of states in this region, do trade, work together, cooperate on the climate change and global warming and water shortage, population growth. There is so much we can do together. So all we can do as public intellectuals is to keep on questioning the wisdom behind this right-wing, self-righteous narrative of the past. In India now you are told that for thousands of years they have had democracy and all that. I mean, that's as good or as bad as us being told that the West has learned democracy from Muslims who established the Riyasat-e-Madina and all. I mean, these are psychologically maybe needed to feel good, but they don't lead us forward. The forward march is based on pluralism, on secularism, on humanism. And I think you and I and all of us are under moral obligation, because we are educated and people listen to us, to keep on presenting this alternative.
My name is Faria, I am from Kashmir, I am a political activist, and my question is to Dr. Saab that as he previously suggested that the people of all walk of the people, they should come together and they sit and they decide what kind of Pakistan they want. But the thing is that people have been conditioned for past 75 years. The society has been radicalized and the social fabric or the secular fabric of the society has been destroyed. So how could you suggest that the people, they can sit together, whether they are, because each one of, they are against of the other person. And there might be a possibility of civil war if the forces is not there. So in this situation, and because they are not of sound mind, we can say, not offended anyone, but how could they make a good decision?
Okay, good. Well, there is no guarantee that this can happen and will lead to positive results. It could lead to chaos, and that threat is to be considered. But you know, when I wrote this book on the partition of Punjab, the Punjab bloody partition and cleansed, one thing I discovered was that almost 99% people who went and killed others left their own neighbors alone, didn't attack them. The village, their own Muslims in that village were guaranteed an exit, safe, but they went and attacked Muslims somewhere else, and vice versa, Hindus and Sikhs. So I say, when you make people sit together, say the people of Lahore, you know, they sit together and they start discussing. It's very difficult to say that because of my belief I am entitled to kill you. And if that realization becomes an awareness, then maybe we can move forward. It's very similar to what happened in South Africa. This reconciliation and mutual forgiveness followed from that. So I can't say that this is going to work miracles, but do we have a choice? Because 76 years has been like hoping that the politicians would be better than the military regimes, and they proved to be bad, irresponsible, as much as the military that we know. So this is the only thing which has not been tried. And I think, I tell you one thing, nobody to this day has been held responsible for what happened in 1947, when 7 lakh people were killed. And one reason is that on both sides there is no attempt to ask for forgiveness and so on. We don't do that. The Western people somehow have matured to a point that they've done it many centuries later, but that is one way to deal with the guilt that you carry with yourself. So I would say, let's try it. It's the only thing which has not been tried. And one thing more, no riots start and continue for more than 2 hours unless the state is letting it happen. Take spontaneously, while you bring people here, they may get at each other's throats. But if the state is there with the police and the army and so on, and they agree to let them talk, I think it can happen.
Ji, the gentleman.
Yes, I think there is no doubt that after 75 years, you know where the power, which the army holds the power. And are you asking that they can develop that? But if a nation doesn't respect your own people, and that's what the main thing is, they have never from 75 years, they haven't respected the will of the people. They kept them like monkeys. Even the politicians, if you ask them a question, they can't make a proper sentence. So where the national intellect will develop? We are talking about in English, or even Urdu, they can't speak it. So that has been a deliberate effort. It is my own experience, very down to earth with the grassroots level, that it is being deliberately kept. If you don't let them...
I agree, sir. We don't have two views on this.
Yes, but the thing is, what we are
Sir,
talking...
is there a question?
Is, yeah, in the present circumstances, what we are talking about, South Africa, the sort of, you understand what I mean, that talk...
The question.
Yeah, question is it possible now? Because I think what we are talking about, the past is gone. I have a feeling that the moment has come, that all those things have gone behind. People are a little bit away.
So that's what you are saying, then you are agreeing, isn't it?
Yeah,
but now is the time.
Yes, but the thing is, present government is deliberately abusing the power. Is it?
Yes.
So we can't ask them.
So
sir,
we can only create a...
Are you giving a comment or a question?
Yes, the thing is, question is that, question is if we, can we do something? Because actually that is also...
the answer would be we should do something.
Yeah.
Question.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammad. I'm a second year law student at Soas. My question has to do with how do you see a divorce between the political rhetoric of Pakistan.
Please, let's listen to that young man.
My question has to do with, do you envision a divorce between political rhetoric of religion and radical religion with how politics works, because of how ingrained it is into our identity, the amount of intellectual corruption that has happened, and the amount of propaganda regarding religion? So do you envision a change in the near future?
What was the question?
Do you envision a change?
Do you envision
a change
between the divorce between religion and politics?
Yes.
Between religion and politics.
No, I'm saying that's the only way modern states can manage the diversity of identities, diversity of interests, by finding a formula which is rational, which is fair to everyone. And that can only happen if we have free debate and discussion on this. And instead of, idolizing human beings as perfect and so on, we leave that aside and look at the 76 years and its destructive consequences, and now pose questions to find a way out. So, there is no other way to handle this.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. So my name is Bilal. As you can see, people are talking about present and future. I have a little bit question about the past. You mentioned that there was a mistake of Muhammad Ali Jinnah regarding making Karachi the capital, the federal territory, and making Sindhis go out of Karachi. So I have a little bit of question. What do you think would have happened if the refugees coming from India wouldn't have any space of themselves or any properties of themselves, would have gone through if they were under the rule of someone else?
Well, that I don't know, because when these people came, I would like to argue that they made a choice to come to Pakistan. Unlike Punjabis on both sides who had to run for their lives, people who came from the UP, actually, once again I must mention the great services of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who prevented attacks on Muslims. We couldn't. Had the Hindus and Sikhs, according to the 3 June 1947 plan, stayed on in what is today Pakistan, 21% of the population of Pakistan would be Hindu and Sikh. But by December 1947, we had made them all run away, and only 1.6% were left in interior Sindh. And to this day, I think that is the percentage. In India, it was 9.8% Muslims who stayed back. They are now 14.2, some say 15%. So the numbers have gone up there. And it was because the Indian government didn't follow this sort of policy of excluding Muslims from the subcontinent. So under the current situation, I think we have to learn from dealing with cultural pluralism and correcting ourselves, that's all.
Ji,
Thank you, Dr. First of all, thank you for your very thought-provoking talk. मेरे दो सवाल हैं. First is basically based upon what you said on the communal part of Jinnah's personality, and something that unleashed. I think that is absolutely spot on. But I wonder if you would just talk about, is Jinnah, was his mindset that communal, or was he a victim of a communal politics going on in the Congress to begin with? Because there's a part of Jinnah's life when he was not very communal, and he was part of Congress, but he was always referred as a Muslim minority leader or a Muslim representative of Muslims. Whereas Jinnah's earlier life, when he started as a young barrister in Bombay, it seems more like, or some historians would argue, it was more to do with as an Indian leader, and he wanted to, because one thing about Jinnah's personality, I don't know if you agree or not, is that he thought himself, or he always thought of himself to be a very superior human being, and a very eloquent person.
Right.
And whenever he was being pushed by the likes of Gandhi as a Muslim leader, I think this is something which really annoyed him probably. And then there's a different Jinnah we see probably from afterwards of second roundtable, 1935-36.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that? So that is one first question, but the second part is now towards the end of your talk, where you suggested the outcome or solution of our problem is a 6 months debate where we have a
open debate.
Open debate where we have a caretaker government by the likes of Dr. Ayesha
Yes.
Siddiqa, which I have to say you're not her real friend, because no one should be sending her to politics. The problem is that we've experienced this, what you're suggesting, because every military takeover actually has given us this. They have given us very eminent people, like for example you start with Ayub Khan. Bhutto was someone who was teaching to begin with. I mean, we're not talking about like people, but for example,
no, I am not thinking of these people.
No, I'm saying, I'm giving the example that we have tried having.
We haven't tried
very educated, but just coming to the last part of my question is, shouldn't the solution be very simple? I mean, just your thoughts. Shouldn't the solution be very simple of having what the Constitution says? Have free and fair elections every 5 years or 4 years if people think 5 years is too long. But just have it continuously. People could get it wrong one time, second time, third time, but if it is happening continuously without any interruption, do you think that is one solution?
Actually, if that were to happen, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So they haven't let it happen. That's the only reason. Otherwise, that's the best. Coming to your first question, I don't think Jinnah was forced by communalism within the Congress. It's the other way around. Because in 1919, the British, after the First World War, introduced the Rowlatt Acts. And the Rowlatt Acts was an insult to the Indian people who, during the First World War, had contributed voluntarily by joining the British Indian Army, and people gave money, and especially in Punjab, I think more than £1 million were given as donations for the war. The British, instead of giving them a new sort of a more generous package on self-government, introduced the Rowler tax, which made possible the arrest of people on mere suspicion that they were involved in a grand conspiracy to overthrow the legitimate government of His Majesty in India. And Jinnah and Gandhi and all of them reacted on that occasion. Then the Khilafat issue came up. And the Khilafat issue, I have said, Jinnah Sahib was as much as Gandhi on the same page. I have quoted Jinnah in 1919, he went along with the Muslim League delegation to England, and he talked to the British newspapers, and they gave him a short shrift. Nobody listened to them, and he pleaded that the Ottoman Empire is the last symbol of Muslims in the world which is independent, so please don't dismember it. Secondly, after the Rowler tax, I have quoted him saying that first they took away our liberty, which is the Rowler tax. Now they are taking away our faith, which is destroying the Khilafat. But Jinnah Sahib was not willing to go out in the streets to protest this injustice which the Muslims thought was being done to the Muslims of the world. They went to Gandhiji then. And Gandhiji then supported the Khilafat movement because for him this was the first time after 1909, when the Muslims were given separate electorates, that there was a chance that they can be brought back into the nationalist movement. So it was done in good faith. And that led to the non-cooperation movement, largely on the recommendation of this ulama type people. And that's where Jinnah Sahib in 1920 left the Congress never to return. So there was no party level Hindu prejudice against Jinnah. Actually, when Gandhi accepted the non-cooperation movement, many in the Congress party were opposed to it as well. But Gandhi and that idea sort of took off, and then they were all arrested and so on. Later on, I have given many examples of Gandhi and Nehru and the rest pleading with Jinnah that please let's work together and keep India united. It will be there is the Motilal Nehru report, if you like, and I can give you its basic features. It says India will be a secular state. There will be no state religion. Men and women will have equal rights. India will be a federation with a strong center. 39 items were given to the center and 67 to the provinces. Hindustani will be the national language of India, with English maintained for the south, and all provinces, each province will have the right to use their own mother tongue for their business and for their education and so on. It's the Muslim League who in 1936, again when this offer was made, came up with this fantastic idea that Hindustani is no language, it's a Congress propaganda, and Urdu is the mother tongue of Muslims. So communalizing language is also because of Jinnah and the Muslim League. And at the end of the day, communalism became the only plank on which the Muslim League could build its support. And basically, the background was in 1936, Nehru had made a statement that in future India we will abolish zamindari system and we will recast India in the light of the experiment of the Soviet way of building socialism. At that point then we find Jinnah talking to Sir Skandar Hayat and the big landlords and all, and they join, they start, the Muslim League, regional parties come together. So no communalism, sir, no.
Assalamualaikum. Sir, I'm Hassan. I come from Lahore and I'm currently living and working in London. Sir, I was born in 1997 when Pakistan turned 50, and in my 26 years of life, every 14th August, I see Pakistanis and people around celebrating the independence. with very little realization to the tragedies that happened during the partition, and not a lot of work has been done. Mostly it has been done in India, and your has been the most prominent in Pakistan. So my question is, if instead of celebrating the Azadi or the independence, we also realize the tragedies and look at the darker events that happened in 1947 and years after that, do you think that will make the general public more tolerant? And have you seen that or observed that in any other part of the world where, from history and from dark events that happened in a nation, people have maybe realized it and become more tolerant?
Well, let me say like this, that in India, the partition is deplored, lamented as a great tragedy. In Pakistan, people are trained to say that had we remained in a united India, we would be under permanent Hindu domination. So partition was necessary for our own freedom. So the narrative which has been ingrained in Pakistan through the educational system is diametrically opposite of the narrative in India about the partition. I would say that wisdom says that things happen in history, and so there are two states. What we can do is to argue that both are members of the United Nations, they are bound by the same international law. So let's start behaving according to that, and we accept each other as two neighbors who have historically are always going to live together. So we better cooperate than have this confrontation. I think that's
1999, this is what was exactly about to happen with Bajpayee's visit to
exactly.
the whole.
This is what was going to happen. Ji.
Any,
Sorry, another question's just popped into my head. Speaking as someone that was born a decade or so after Pakistan, so refugees from West Punjab, so we grew up with a mythology that was very real, given that my community is very traumatized, and I think that trauma carries on, and I think that trauma is very important in the way that it's defined our lives and life choices and where people live and whatever. So I think there is a real relevance to what the brother is saying, and that exists, I think very much for that introspection that has happened in India, but maybe not so much in Pakistan. What I was asking, Professor, is could you enlarge a bit on what we now call geopolitics, but in a sense we didn't have those perspectives there, because I'm very fascinated by the colonial and empirical interests, because we were in a world where they dominated. You mentioned the Ark. I've heard that there was a very secret conference at the end 1919 by Western powers, similar to the conference where they all sat around a table and carved up Africa, but a similar one again. And is this where this concept of the arch came from, as early as 1919, and also that Jinnah himself, because it's a balance, isn't it, of these huge, great personalities. From our side, Nehru was one, and Gandhi was a Sardar Patel, and it, it was whatever. And that there is a kind of sense of, what's that quote, that history is made by opportunistic individuals being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong time, depending on your perspective. But I'm beginning to sense that there were much bigger forces at play, and therefore was an extent where Jinnah was seen to be the person that, not quite a puppet, but there were bigger agendas that he seemed to fit. Yeah.
Well, largely the way you tell us about the grand planning of the Western powers, I have noted that from 1926 onwards there was a discussion that this northern part of India, subcontinent, with a Muslim compact majority, should be connected with the Middle East or West Asia, and it should be an Anglo-Mohammedan empire.
Yes.
And one of those who was advocating this was Sir Aga Khan, the founder of the Ismaili movement. Yes, I quoted him as well. So this idea had been around for a while. But I've also said that 43, when Lord Wavell came as the second last Viceroy, Lord Lilithgow, who was leaving, he said, we are here for another 30 years. So the British had no plans of leaving India in 1947. They were forced to leave in 1947 primarily because they were smashed economically, and American pressure was intense that you hand over power to the Indians. But in doing so, they still did it according to their preference, and that was to partition India to create Pakistan. And I've given many arguments, like on the 12th of May 1947, the three heads of the British Armed Forces, the hero of the Second World War, Field Marshal Montgomery, Lord Ismay and some other high-ups, they wrote a memorandum saying that if partition takes place, Mr. Jinnah has showed an interest in joining the Commonwealth, whereas Hindustan may go its own way. So if Pakistan now joins, we should demand access to Karachi port facilities, Pakistan airfields and Muslim manpower. So it is the British military who at the twilight moment before the partition thing took place recommended it, and then it became part of the 3 June 1947 partition plan. So I would say that the British had been toying this idea, but they were not thinking of leaving India yet. Their hands were forced by the Second World War, and I would say some resistance by the INA and so on.
But something I didn't realise since I went was Russia.
Yeah,
And
Russia was the main
issue of
bugbear
Russia.
for the British was always the Russians,
Yeah.
not for the Americans.
Yeah, I would just like to ask the thing that we are still, in last 76 years trying to, dig down the ideology of Pakistan. And it was till 1947, it was told that it's a two-nation theory that is, being introduced, and that is where, Hindus and Muslims can live together. But Jinnah never wrote anything about it. He never wrote any article, never wrote any book, whereas we consider him as a very learned man. Did you find out what was the reason that he never wrote anything about all this confusion? Number one.
All I know, he never wrote. What were his reasons, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we know that he was not even metric pass here. So how could he start writing? उन्होंने metric pass नहीं था किया, वो 8 जमातें पास थे. तो लिखने के लिए skills चाहिए ना. Law की books तो वो जानते थे. He was good at pleading in a court of where you can use all the dramatic effects of theatre and so on to win a case. But that doesn't mean you are an expert in law and so on. He was only 8 Jamaat pass. So how could he write anything sustained,
My second part was that this normally people say that there was a big sacrifice that people migrated from there, so many lakhs people were died. Was it a massacre or was it a sacrifice?
It was a massacre. I have said in my book that nobody died for Pakistan, but so many people died because of Pakistan.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. Nobody wanted to leave their huts and their small plots of land and their shops and so on. People are rooted in the earth. Forcing people out of their homes is the biggest tragedy you can force on people. And they all had to run for their lives. That is why 8 lakh people were killed in less than 5 months. And if you look at Holocaust taking place over 5 years, I think the number of people killed in these 4 months proportion-wise is even higher than what happened during the Holocaust.
Please.
Thank you, Professor. First of all, I have a question about the current political situation that we have in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So we've seen over the years that the militarization has impacted the political landscape of Pakistan. So do you think that we have any potential ramifications that are possible for the future to make a better state?
Say it again.
Yeah, political.
So basically, I want to ask that because of militarization, the political landscape has
Vilification?
Yeah, any ramifications?
Militarization. Because of militarization?
Yeah, because of the militarizations that we had over the years, in the past 75 years. For the current political situation, are there any potential ramifications to make a better state?
Well, I think this Ayesha Siddiqa Sahiba would be even more competent to answer this, because the economic might they have assembled is so complete that unless this is broken, Pakistan has no chance of, improving from its current low level of existence. And what I have, let me now talk about political science. In Hobbes, he says that human beings were in a state of nature where all of us were equal and all of us were equally free. But human nature was such that we all wanted to dominate and gain power. So everybody lived in fear of one another. So the life was short, brutish and nasty. It was a war of all against all. This is Hobbes. Now, Hobbes says that if that was the only nature of human beings, they would remain there. What made them transcend that was another instinct, and that is the instinct of survival. So I have been saying that this army and Pakistan have run their complete course. If they want to survive now, they have to make a break with the past. Otherwise, Pakistan will disintegrate. So if that Hobbes' understanding that there is a rationality of survival in all beings, even states are beings are, then in order to survive they might come to a rational conclusion that we don't want a total confrontation with India, we have to live in peace, we have to, find another relationship with Afghanistan, with Iran and so on, and become a normal state, and we don't export terrorism, then I think this state has a chance of going forward. Otherwise, it will, I have said, there is an inbuilt tendency of self-destruction, nihilism, in the way they have dealt with Pakistan as a state idea.
You have a question? You had a question, maybe? Yeah, sorry.
Yes, sorry, my name is Usman, and I think, thank you for bringing in the Israel-Pakistan comparison, because what has happened with what is happening, we've seen like our progressive and very brave, by the way, Jewish sisters and brothers who have come out, and they have connected their Jewishness with anti-occupation by saying, when we said never again, we said never again for anybody. This is apropos to the Garrison state part and Balochistan, and I'm an ethnic Punjabi, so we're not going to go into history of what happened. But I just wanted to know what conceptual framework, similar, given the similarities you guys have discussed, can we on our part, especially as urban middle class or Punjabi or the privileged, if you will, what conceptual framework can we use to aid the Baloch who are oppressed? They are our Gaza, basically. Nobody talks about them. It's in front of everybody. So, and obviously when they do get an opportunity, if they do not rather get an opportunity to deal with this Garrison state, which they probably wouldn't, then there would be an increase in loss of life and militancy. And I'm really sorry, it's a bit of a loaded question, but I have been thinking so much about it, I would love to know your answer. If that is to be the case, do you then intellectually consider that they do have a moral right to militant resistance against a state that has declared all-out war on them, even beyond Pakistani borders, in Canada, in the United Kingdom? So that is my question. Sorry, it was a bit long. Huh?
Well, my answer has been given in so many videos that I have done and in my books. I think that this whole state idea, you see in philosophy there is a principle that if the basic premise is flawed, the argument you build on it will also be flawed and the conclusion. Let me, for people who may, a simple example, let's say we say that all men are mortals Ishtiaq is a man, therefore he is moral. So the basic premise is sound and the conclusion is sound. But if we say all men are intelligent and Ishtiaq is a man, then the conclusion should be that Ishtiaq is also intelligent, but we know that's not true. So the basic idea that people are member of a nation because of a particular faith is in itself flawed. Because we discovered later on that given this purity of faith, homogeneity of Muslims, you have 1400 years of all the disputes which started with the death of the Prophet. And to this day they come to haunt the Muslims. But now what to do? I think instead of relying on Jinnah's August speech and somebody quoting him when he says the Quran is a complete constitution for us, that's what he has said also. We put that aside and we have an open discussion. We have the state. We are 230 million people. We don't give dignity and rights to our own people, especially the oppressed nationalities and minorities. Is there a fair way of dealing with one another? And we can hope that out of this wisdom will arise that Pakistan can still survive while we do justice to everyone who lives in Pakistan. That's the only thing I can think of. Otherwise, if Pakistan disintegrates, I would not be I would not deplore that or lament that or start beating my chest, because I have warned it for such a long time. I can't be held responsible, or anyone of us who thinks like this, for what the Pakistani elite or ruling class does to Pakistan.
We'll take last two questions. So here and all right. Yeah, all right. Last three questions.
So, Professor, my name is Sarmad. I work in the financial services industry here. And in the sort of like last answer, you mentioned that you are sort of like not in favor of an ideologically based country, really. And like Dr. Saiba mentioned that Israel was formed at the same time as Pakistan, so probably there is some merit in an ideologically based country. So I was just wondering, and you also mentioned that Jinnah went to the communal side of his own record rather than being pushed on that side. But for example, the cabinet mission, for example, was more rejected by Nehru rather than Jinnah. So my main basic question is just like, how did you keep your sort of like own biases in check when you were writing these books?
Sorry?
How did you keep your own biases sort of like in check when you were writing all these books?
Well, I don't know. Every writer must advance a thesis on the basis of verifiable evidence. And once you do that, that's your only duty as a scholar. And it's for you to find what personal bias of mine has affected my writing. I can't talk about my biases because all my life I have fought against this whole notion of a scholar pushing a thesis without reliable evidence. And I don't want to name that person who got away with murder by writing such a book, saying that Jinnah didn't want partition and Nehru forced it upon him. This is absolute trash. It's the other way around. And the cabinet mission plan, by the way, it was announced on the 16th of May, and on the 22nd of May, Jinnah Sahab said that it doesn't grant us the Pakistan we wanted. And it places the Muslims in 3 groups instead of the 2. And we will study it seriously and then come up with our decision on it. The Congress took the position that we will not accept this because it doesn't have an effective center. So these positions were taken at that time, but the final decisions were handed out on the 25th of June by both, in which Jinnah said that we will join the interim government, but we will not go to the Constituent Assembly to frame a constitution for a united India till such time the 3 groups, A, B and C, have their constitutions in place, in which all three groups have the right to every 10 years opt out of the union. And the Congress took the position that we will not join the interim government, but we will go to the Constituent Assembly and frame a constitution for a united India, which will be a federation with an effective centre. So both parties half accepted the cabinet mission plan and rejected the second half. But it doesn't stop there. After all, in August 1947, finally, an interim government was formed. So what did the Muslim League do then? In February 1947, Nawabzada Liaquat Ali Khan, who was the finance minister, he comes with a budget which taxed 20 to 25% business, industry and trade, and there is not a word about any land reform. It's at that moment that Sardar Patel says that no more. In a united India with the Muslim League, we will not be able to put into practice our program of democratizing India and creating a sort of socially aware state and so on. So it's as late as the 8th of March 1947 that the Congress also agreed to the partition. The demand for partition is Mr. Jinnah's. The British granted it and the Congress opposed it until the 8th of March 1947. On the other hand, the Sikhs, already 1 week after the Lahore resolution, came up with their demand that if the Punjab is partitioned on the basis of religion, then we will insist that those parts of the Punjab which are Hindu and Sikh majority are not part of Pakistan. So these ideas were already there.
Thank you. I'm Ahmed, been a psychiatrist for 25 years. I'm interested in your view on, thank you very much everyone, everyone did a great job. So in terms of Jinnah as a person, coming back, you've got all those smart things about in politics and everything. As a person, how does he come across? Because he, to me, as a psychiatrist, he comes a very OCD kind of person. You know, detachable collars, white shirt, impeccably dressed, very aware of his thing. It's not about talking politics. So does that help him become so assertive? Because he really stands out in terms of the general Muslim population as a, he's not, doesn't sound like a product of his time. He sounds like somebody who's Western educated, apparently whatever education he got. Do you think that there was some kind of a OCD element?
OCD stands for what?
Obsessive compulsive disorder kind of thing, very obsessive.
Okay.
You know, very obsessive. The way he dresses up, we look at those things. The way he carries himself, his dog, he's very aware of when he's having a photograph. You know, even when he's, I mean, most politicians are, it doesn't come, I would like to have a drink with him because he'll be very uptight kind of guy. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. But he is a kind of fun guy, isn't it? You can have a chat with him. And do you think?
Well, I can only illustrate this sort of thing, that he did connect with his own, the consequences of his ideas. I'll give you an example. This whole partition thing led to millions of people being uprooted. 14, 15 million people uprooted and forced to run for their lives. 1 million killed, of which 8 lakh were Punjabis. And yet, as Governor General, he tells the Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Sri Prakasha, that please inform Nehru that this house that I built in Bombay, brick by brick, is very dear to me. It should not be taken over by the Indian government. It should be rented out to Europeans.
Yes, exactly.
Not even Muslim Indians or Hindus or Sikhs, but Europeans. And every month I should get rupees 3,000 as the rent. Now, if because of you all these people are in the refugee camps and so many have died, you can't connect with their tragedy, their trauma. You are still interested in having your own house and your property. So there is a disconnect between his ideas, his positions, and the consequences. So if that is OSD, then that's the word I've learned from
Thank you, sir. Going back to your solutions, having an open dialogue. I would say, people of different nationalities of Pakistan have been very clear what kind of Pakistan they want. Baroos have been very clear what kind of Pakistan they want, they don't want. But for the sake of this, discussion, let's say we have in this exercise, how can we ensure that, we can have a more transparent discussion in the presence of a hegemonic institution, which is the Pakistani military? How can we have this dialogue and prevent the Pakistani military interfering in that exercise, which you just suggested?
We can't. I mean, there is no guarantee. I'm saying this is the only thing we have not tried. And if the Pakistani state has realized, and I hope they have, that there are no patterns out there to bail them out. The Americans have shooed them away. The Saudis have sorted out their relations with the Iranians, and the present crown prince is into reform, so that old Islamism, Wahhabism is no longer on the cards. The Chinese, we know that if they give you 1 rupee, they want 2 back in return. So none of these powers are there in a position to bail out the way it could happen in the past. So under these circumstances, will now this ruling class, this establishment, deep state, finally come to the conclusion that this doesn't work and we should try something else? And that something else would be like an open discussion where the ISI can sit there and listen to what people are saying, like they let me go and express my ideas without I being...
They're not going to do agriculture themselves, become a contractor. And the one thing which comes to my mind, at least the United Fruit Company of the United States, which became a contractor in Peru, Guatemala, Panama, Argentina, and the way they destroyed politics and the way they the kind of authoritarianism and oppression that happened, which then brought people together to fight. Now, Dr. made a comment that people don't come out, people don't protest unless state allows them. Well, there is also pressure through which state allows them. And the problem that has been, and even in our more recent crisis that has been happening in Pakistan, is that we never managed to have a Tahrir Square in Pakistan. I mean, for those who support Imran Khan, PTI and its ideology, I think one of the biggest problems, and I remember seeing this video in which Imran Khan says that these generals kind of, pull back and get scared if you take 20,000 people out. Problem is that even the best of times, Imran Khan never managed to get 20,000 people out on the streets. And unless an oppressive force, unless you show them numbers and increase their cost, they will not give in. The unpopularity is hardly, the cost. They're still managing, they're still adjusting. So my argument is that for that to happen, a political movement has to be built. And again, I go and look at Latin America. Now what happened, what worked for Latin America is that at least the church was with the people and part of the pushback. Now we do not have that. I mean, the left in Pakistan is completely, there's a lot of chatter, but no movement. It is ended, like left in a lot of places in the world. The right wing, will it take on at some point in time? Right now, the right wing is the military's partner. Will it ever come to that confrontation? But we have to wait for that confrontation when things break down to a point when people say, all right, let me put my differences aside and sit down and talk. Now is definitely not the time and moment. And one last point is that, this whole idea of being given an opportunity to speak. Much appreciated, Dr. Saab, कि आप मेरी नौकरी लगवा देंगे. And you're recommending that I should, I should be allowed in. Love to go back home. But without a job. But let me also argue that I don't think that it's also a matter of time, timing, and that timing is not there. When people take responsibility, when intellectuals take responsibility and say, no, we've messed up, let's speak the truth. I mean, every corner that I turn around, I see more intellectual dishonesty.
Right.
And the problem is that, so who's going to sit with whom? Sadly, it wasn't too long ago, maybe a couple of months ago, Soas, this university we got, who's currently the caretaker information minister, to speak at Soas, and we thought he's going to be honest and he's a dissident and he has progressive views. Didn't know that it takes a job, to turn people around. So with that kind of a mechanism, and I think completely appreciate, and I think that what Dr. Saab, I would really thank you for, is all the hard work, all the effort you've put in educating us and the younger generation, because at least what we can hope is that this younger generation, they have the facts and probably they figure out what way to do. So thank you so much for
This has been a great occasion for me, and thank you, Dr. Saab, and all the students who organized this. These bड़ी मेहरबानी आपकी, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. Thank you so much.